We are going to learn about the Tachanun. So we're going through the course of the davening, and I don't have the PowerPoint in front of me right now, but we spoke about the morning prayers, and then we moved on to, that was earlier in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and then we spoke about the verses of song, we spoke about the Shema and its blessings, we spoke about the Shmoneh Esrei, the Amidah, we spoke about the when the Chazan repeats the Amidah when we have a minyan. Please God, soon we should see that in real life. And now we'll speak about the prayer that comes right after the Amidah, which is called the Tachanun, which is a time, the confession prayer. So you might not hear the word confession so much in Judaism, but it certainly is a part of it. We need to regret the things that we've done wrong and resolve not to do it again. And there's a time for that, and the time for that is right after the Shmoneh Esrei. So we'll go through a few points that are mentioned in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in that regard. Okay, I see there's a little intro over here in the English. So although it's not in the original Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, we'll go through that. Concerning his many prayers, Moshe said of himself, "Va'eshev bahar arba'im yom, I sat on the mountain for 40 days. Va'anechi amarati bahar, I stood on the mountain. V'esnapel lifnei Hashem, I prostrated myself before Hashem." So we see three different verses in the way that Moshe davens to Hashem. Symbolically, also Jews also assume these three positions during prayer. We sit before the Shmoneh Esrei with the Shema, like that first phrase, I sat on the mountain for 40 days. We stand during the Amidah, like we have in the second statement, I stood on the mountain. And we fall on our faces. We'll discuss what that means exactly after the Amidah. Just like Moshe says, I prostrated myself before Hashem. This is called Tachanun, supplication. Originally, Nefilas Apayim, falling on one's face, was performed by entirely prostrating one's body upon the ground while davening and pleading for one's needs. However, with the destruction of the temple, this practice was discouraged. Also, the Gemara states that only a righteous person comparable to Joshua, who is assured of a response to a prayer in this manner, may assume this position in prayer. Therefore, the custom has become to perform Nefilas Apayim only perfunctorily by sitting and tilting one's head downwards. So originally, this is from the Aruch HaShulchan, written about some 150 years ago. Originally, there was this phenomenon of a person falling flat on the ground. I mean, there was a phenomenon when in front of a king where a person would bow down by falling flat to the ground. And this concept existed with a Jew davening to Hashem. But today we don't do that. We're actually not allowed to do that. But we do have what's called the Nefilas Apayim, falling on one's face. And we do that when we say the Tachanun prayer by resting our head on top of our hand. Upon completing the Shmoneh Esrei, now to the first halacha, Tachanun is said with the Nefilas Apayim, falling on the face. Idle talk is prohibited between Shmoneh Esrei and Tachanun. So earlier when we spoke about the davening, we said that from the beginning, pretty much the beginning of the davening, from Baruch Sha'amar, which is the beginning of the verses of song, up until the Shmoneh Esrei, one is forbidden to speak. One may answer Amen, but one is not allowed to speak. Once one finishes the Shmoneh Esrei, one is allowed to speak. So he says over here, idle talk. When he says idle talk, okay, he says any conversation not relevant to the tefillah, but the truth is in the original Shulchan Aruch, he says that you are allowed to share a few words. It's okay to speak briefly, but not to have a proper conversation. So once a person has taken their 3 steps back after davening the Amidah, at that point, one is allowed to speak. If you had an important phone call to make, let's say you saw somebody was calling you during davening, you forgot to turn your phone off, and you turned your phone off, but you know that they're waiting, they're stuck somewhere. So the first opportunity you'll have where you'll be able to call and advise that you're still in the middle of davening would be after the Shmoneh Esrei. So such a phone call would be okay. It would be okay to call and say, I'm sorry, you said you'd be there at 8, you're there at 7:30, I'll only be able to get home in 20 minutes. That's fine. You could make that phone call, meaning you could have a brief discussion, meaning there's no prohibition in speaking per se. But to have a proper conversation would be not okay, because we do want to fall on our faces, meaning to offer these supplications in this Tachanun prayer immediately after the Amidah. So it should happen right afterwards, but a short interruption is okay. An extended interruption is not okay. Is that clear? Yes. Okay. Now, which hand does one fall on? So in the morning prayers by Shachris, since most of us are wearing tefillin on our left hand, so we don't want to lean on the hand that has our tefillin on it. That would be disrespectful to the tefillin. Rather, we'll lean on the other hands. But by mincha time, when we're not wearing tefillin, we lean specifically on our weaker hand on our left hand. So in the by Shachris, we'll lean on our right hand, and by mincha, we'll lean on our left hand. I'm the exception to this one. Why am I an exception? Because my left hand is stronger, and my right hand is stronger, and I can only write with my left hand. We mentioned that the main thing when it comes to tefillin is the hand that you write with. So since I write with only my left hand, I put tefillin on my right hand. So I actually put tefillin on my stronger hand, which is quite interesting. There's a lot of debate amongst the rabbis about that, but that's what I do. Which means that I always lean on the same hand because I'm always able to lean on my left hand because I don't put tefillin on my weaker hands. And usually I put tefillin on my stronger hand because it's still considered my secondary hand in the context of writing. So that's just an interesting one. But for the rest of most of humanity, we lean on the hand that does not have the tefillin in the morning and on the weaker hand in the afternoon. The Nefilas apayim, which means falling on one's face, is preferably done while sitting, but when necessary, it may be done while standing. So if, for example, when we go back to shul, we're in a scenario where there aren't chairs, then we will still be able to say the prayers. It will just need to be done standing if there isn't a chair to sit on. After Tachanun, so at the end of Tachanun, of that prayer, there's a phrase that says, "Va'anachnu lo yedeta ma naseh kelecha yedeno." We don't know what we'll do, but we're dedicated to you, Hashem. So that is still said sitting. And then after that, one stands up and finishes up the final clauses of the Tachanun prayer. I don't have a sitter in front of me. I'm not sure if you all do either, but I do think that the art scroll probably tells you at what point you could stand up or at what point you should be seated. But basically, we're talking not about a Monday and Thursday. We're talking about a regular morning, any other morning or the afternoon after mincha. So we fall on our faces, and towards the end of the Tachanun prayer, that is when we stand up. Number 4. Okay, we only need to fall on our faces in a place where there's a Sefer Torah. If there's no Sefer Torah, if there's no Torah scroll, even if there are other holy books, then we don't fall on our faces. Rather, we just say the psalm, which is part of the Tachanun prayer, without falling on our face. So this is relevant now, as my father mentions in the morning Zoom davening, that we now have Tachanun, but we don't fall on our faces because we're not in the presence of a Sefer Torah. So that obviously has to do, covering our face has to do with the respect of the Sefer Torah. Okay, if you're in the vestibule of the shul, like the lobby, and the doors of the shul are open, then it's still like you are at shul and you would lean on your hand. There's a lot of interesting stuff over here, but I am wanting to move through to the end of davening since we've been sitting on this for a while. So I'm going to move at somewhat of a faster pace, but you're welcome to follow up with me with any questions afterwards. In the house of a mourner, or in the house where somebody passed away, Tachanun is not said during the 7 days of mourning. Even at mincha of the 7th day, when the mourner would have already gotten up. It is customary that even if the mourners return home, they do not say Tachanun. If a mourner is present in shul, the congregation do not follow what the mourner does. He will skip out Tachanun, but the rest of them will. Anybody remember why we don't say Tachanun in the house of a mourner? Well, it had to do, actually, it's the opposite. Earlier we spoke about not duchening, not saying the priestly blessings of the house of mourning, because we said it's a place of sadness. So it's not a time to do a prayer of joy in a place of sadness. So here it's actually the converse. Since it's such a place of sadness, therefore it's not appropriate that we do confession, which is more of a sad prayer. The reason, actually, I didn't get a chance to look up, and I'll have to get back to you about. But I think it's about adding sadness on sadness. We don't want to add sadness to sadness, but I still need to confirm that. Number 6. Tachanun is omitted in a shul where circumcision will take place. So if there's going to be a bris, or if the father of the child to be circumcised is present, or if the sandik, the person who holds the child at the bris, is present, or if the moil is davening there. If any of these 3 people are present, the father of the child, the sandik, or the moil, then wherever they're davening, that whole shul doesn't say Tachanun, because there's such joy that it's not a time to be saying a prayer, which is more of a introspective prayer where we look down at our shortfalls. Okay. If the mincha prayer is said in the child's home before the bris feast or during the feast, Tachanun is not said. But if the mincha prayer is said after we've already benched, meaning you've already concluded all the bris festivities, so when it comes to a chassid, a groom that gets married, so we will see that it goes on for a few days. But for a bris, once the bris is complete, once the bris is finished and we've benched, so then that festivity has come to a formal end, at which point you would say Tachanun. However, the father of the child, the sandik and the moil, do not say Tachanun even after benching, because it's their holiday. So once the bris is complete, it remains a holiday for those 3 people, the father, the sandik, and the moil, but the rest of them would say Tachanun. Please God, we should have a lot of those. Likewise, Tachanun is admitted in the synagogue where a chassid, a groom, is present during all 7 days of festivities, provided that the groom was a bachar, meaning he wasn't previously married, or the bride is a basulah, which again means she wasn't previously married. But if a widower married a widow, meaning if there was a second marriage for both of them, then although it is a huge joy, the joy doesn't extend for 7 days, but it only extends for 3 days, after which Tachanun would resume. On the day of the marriage ceremony, Tachanun is said in the morning, meaning that if Great Park will be having a shul, a wedding on Thursday afternoon, then they would say Tachanun in the morning. But at the mincha preceding the ceremony, it is not said, meaning if you're davening a mincha right before the wedding, then since it's a joyous time, you would leave out the Tachanun. That is obviously provided that the chassid isn't present. Okay, number 8. Tachanun is not said on the following day. So he actually is going to give a whole list of days on the Jewish calendar which are considered festive days. And since there are festive days, we omit the Tachanun on these days. So we don't say Tachanun on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is coming up next week on Thursday, Friday. Neither on the 15th of Av, which we just celebrated about a week ago. There was a celebration where the Jewish people stopped dying in the desert. It was also a time when a lot of marriages took place. The 15th of Shvat, which is called the Rosh Hashanah for trees. A man is compared to a tree of the field. During Hanukkah, during the 2 days of the Greater Purim, meaning the 14th and the 15th. The 2 days of Minor Purim, so when we have an extra month added in, we spoke once before about adding an extra month. So if there's an extra month, the month that's added, so you'll have a 13-month year, and that extra month will also be Adar. So you'll have 2 Adars, Adar 1 and Adar 2. So Purim will be celebrated in the second Adar because we want to celebrate the redemption of the Jewish people at the time of Purim in proximity to the redemption of Pesach. But the first Adar, on the date when Purim would have been celebrated, had there been only 1 Adar, that's already considered like a mini Purim because it is the day of the month when Purim would usually be celebrated. And you don't say Tachanun then either. The 33rd day of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, would be celebrated. The students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai passed away, the one that revealed the the Zayar had said that his passing should be a day of celebration for all that what he represented. So that's another joyous day during the entire month of Nisan. So Nisan is when we have Pesach, and already from the beginning of the month, we're leading up to Pesach, and so we end up not saying Tachanun the entire month of Nisan. We don't say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av. This is quite an interesting one. Tisha B'Av is a very sad day. You would think that maybe we should say Tachanun, but we don't, because Tisha B'Av is actually called a Mayed. It's called a holiday. When Mashiach comes, it will be turned into a joyful day. And already now, perhaps since the Gemara says that Mashiach was born on the day of Tisha B'Av, so since Tisha B'Av has a hidden holiday, which hasn't yet been revealed yet, we only see the sadness, but since it is, after all, called in the prophets as a holiday, so we do not say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av. We don't say Tachanun on the days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. We're going straight from one mitzvah to the next. From Rosh Chodesh Sivan until the day following the day after Shavuot. So from the beginning of Sivan is when we began to get ready to receive the Torah. And from Rosh Chodesh up until after Shavuot, or in some communities up until the 12th of Sivan, which is a couple of days after that, we don't say Tachanun. On the day following Sukkot, so the day after Yom Tov is also considered like a mini festival, the day after the festival. On all these days, Tachanun is also not said at Mincha on the preceding days, meaning if Sukkot is tonight, then already this afternoon, before Sukkot begins, I already won't say Tachanun. So if you're managing, which hopefully you are, if you're managing to daven the Mincha prayer, then bear in mind that on a Friday afternoon, when we're leading into Shabbos, we don't say Tachanun. Or on any afternoon leading into any of these festive days, we don't say Tachanun. So next Thursday is Rosh Chodesh, which is Wednesday night. So already Wednesday afternoon, one would skip out Tachanun from the Mincha prayer. However, on the day before Erev Rosh Hashanah, and on the day before Erev Yom Kippur, so I think it's a mistake over here. On Erev Rosh Hashanah and on Erev Yom Kippur, we say Mincha just before Rosh Hashanah and just before Yom Kippur. On the day before Rosh Hashanah, Tachanun is said at Slichus. Sorry, on the day before. So Erev Rosh Hashanah is already considered a Yom Tov. Erev Yom Kippur is already considered somewhat of a Yom Tov. So you wouldn't say Tachanun, but on the day before, you would still say Tachanun, as well as on the morning of Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, very early when we sang Slichas, then we would say Tachanun, but once it reaches the day of Rosh Hashanah, we stop. Again, sorry, a little bit more on the technical side. All the times we do and don't say Tachanun, but it's something that I guess it's good to know that there are many days on the calendar that are joyous days or festive days, and on those days we don't say Tachanun. This is an interesting one. I often get asked this question. Why is it that on Mondays and Thursdays, the Tachanun is much, much longer? So here's one of the explanations. On Mondays and Thursdays are especially favorable days for prayer because during the 40 days that Moses received the second tablets, the second luchos, Moshe ascended on a Thursday and descended on a Monday. So these days became auspicious days, and therefore additional supplications are recited, and and during those 40 days, that's when he pleaded for forgiveness, meaning that was one long Tachanun where he said, we've sinned and please forgive us. So since that started on a Thursday and ended on a Monday, so on Thursdays and Mondays, we have an extended Tachanun, and this V'horachum is actually an extremely beautiful prayer. I encourage you to look at it in the English. I see we've run out of time. Let me quickly wrap it up, if I may. We say this V'horachum prayer standing. It should be done with concentration, deliberation, in a pleading manner. As I said, a beautiful prayer worth looking at in English. And when we don't say Tachanun, we wouldn't say that special prayer either. Finally, number 10, once Tachanun is complete, the Chazan would say half Kaddish, or on Mondays and Thursdays, we would say Kel Erech Apayim, which leads us into the Torah reading. Please God, tomorrow we'll move on to the process of reading from the Torah. Thank you for joining us and wishing you a wonderful evening.